One.
Welcome to the Daily Objective, day 82 of the war in Israel. So I'm joined today by Morgan Carter. And Morgan, much like yesterday's episode of the Daily Objective, I think we're talking today about something that maybe we should have talked about earlier in the past 3 months. We've kind of been, we weren't planning to have this channel turn into a one-topic channel for months, but yeah, I think if you haven't seen yesterday's episode about the Oslo Accords, I'm very proud of that episode. I recommend watching it. That was supposedly the missed opportunity for peace. Now we're going to talk about what we're often told is the obstacle to peace, which is the settlements. Now, we're going to do something, it's very common, I think, in political discourse for people to express views without having actually thought them through to the same extent that you would think through something else that you're doing in life. I think people think opinions don't require any knowledge, and this is especially true of the anti-Israel crowd. We The best example of that was that famous video of that we actually did an episode of the Daily Objective on the 30-second video of the woman chanting from the nation to the sea, Palestine will be free, and then the guy asks her from the nation to the sea, and then she corrects it to from the mountains to the sea, and then he asks her what mountains, and she has this blank stare. Now I have said when we did that episode, I did say I'm in no position to diagnose her, certainly from a 30-second clip, but I did think she wasn't playing with a full deck. But I think that is probably true of some in that camp. It's not true of everybody, and yet the ignorance is common. So let's just talk about, first of all, what are the settlements? So Israel, we talked about how a day after, hours after Israel declared its independence, it was attacked by its Arab neighbors. That happened again and again, not just in wars, but in the war of attrition, in between wars. 1967, Israel knew an attack was coming. It preempted that. It won the war against Egypt, Jordan, Syria in 6 days. That's why they called it the Six-Day War. It won that war. It won significant amounts of territory, the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Desert from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, Judea and Samaria on the west bank of the Jordan River from Jordan. And in some of those areas, so Israel offered to negotiate. Of course, the Arabs didn't want to recognize Israel, so they wouldn't do that. In some of those areas, like in the Gaza Strip, in Judea and Samaria, Israel established Jewish villages, and those are what is referred to as the settlements. And we are told that that is Israel settling on Palestinian land, and we're told that international law says that's illegal, and this is the obstacle to peace. Now, as I said yesterday when I was talking about this episode, the people who say this is an obstacle to peace don't often consider terrorism as much an obstacle to peace as they consider these settlements. Morgan, I've been talking for long enough. What are your initial thoughts about the settlements in general as an obstacle to peace?
So uh, we did an episode a few weeks ago on kind of concepts that I thought people probably hear about, brought up in relation to the conflict in Israel, and kind of aren't really very sure about. And I think the issue of settlements is another one of them. So you were saying that you think people generally don't know what they're talking about. And I think I agree that this is one of them. And I think people probably actually in the West very often hear of the idea of settlements in the West Bank and really don't really have a clue really what they are. And I want to put my own hands up and say that this is an area that, compared to the rest of the conflict or the history, I actually know relatively less about. So to some extent, I'm going to be the ignorant Westerner bouncing questions off you to some extent. As to whether they're an impediment for peace, I do have an opinion about that, which is that no, not really. The idea that, particularly with Hamas, for example, if we take them as one group, for example, the idea that the settlements in the West Bank are something that's an impediment to peace with Hamas is obviously quite ridiculous. There literally could not be any peace with Hamas. You could remove all of the settlers from the West Bank, and you would not be able to have peace in Gaza with Hamas. That just is never going to happen. There is no peace with Hamas because Hamas wants to violently remove the state of Israel from the face of the earth. So people are kidding themselves if they entertain that kind of opinion. And then there's further issues with Fatah and the Palestinian Authority on that front as well. There wouldn't really be peace even if the settlements weren't there. So those are my initial thoughts. But then I do have some questions for you as well, though, so which I think you probably have more knowledge on, which I think people might find useful. But those are my initial thoughts.
So yeah, I have a bit more to say. I also want to tell my how I left the left story, because this is relevant here. I was a teenager in Israel. I was a leftist teenager. I very much supported the idea of, give the other side what they want in exchange for peace. And the thing that at the age of 17 kind of didn't sit well and moved me away from the Israeli left was this idea that the future Palestinian state, which I, again, supported, wanted to see live side by side with Israel, couldn't have any Jews. It had to be, as the thumbnail said, a Jew-free zone. This peaceful country, this friend and ally of Israel, could not have any Jews. Now, of course, nobody in Israel, or virtually nobody, was talking about a peace settlement where the Arabs are kicked out of Israel. Nobody would think of that. They're citizens just like the Jews, and but this was what the left was saying, and the left was playing into the narrative of the Palestinians, even though the Palestinians, the narrative there is dishonest, because it's not that they had a problem with Jews living in Gaza, Judea, and Samaria, and nowhere else. They had a problem with Jews living in the Middle East, living anywhere from the river to the sea. So yeah, this was my first step away from the left in Israel. I thought, if people say they can't live among Jews, then they don't actually want peace with Jews.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. I think it's worth pointing out to people that you're not allowed to sell land in the West Bank to a Jewish person. That's illegal. I think, is the punishment death? Am I getting that wrong? Am I mixing that up, or is that what the actual punishment is for selling the land to a Jew?
I don't know. I don't know what the punishment is, but I would say, like, a lot of the land wasn't actually. It's not land that was bought. It was land that was unsettled. It's land that nobody was using for anything.
Yes, but then even if someone in the West Bank wanted to sell their house to a Jew or something like that, they're not allowed to do it. So there's a huge kind of ethnic, collectivist, racist premise that goes on in a lot of this discussion, and it isn't reciprocal. No one's talking about removing the Arabs from Israel, so that's very true. So the one thing that be in my role, as I think, as the typical Westerner will be, is what is the attitude to the settlements from inside Israel? So you said you were kind of a young, left-leaning teenager, and you were in favor of their removal. I take it was from what you were kind of saying. Are people in Israel, do they feel positive about the settlements and the settlers, or do they feel against them? Because we were talking the other week that for someone to be described as far right in Israel as a politician, they probably have to be in favor of the settlements or the settlers. So how do people in Israel feel about it generally?
Yeah, so I don't think you have to be far right. It depends. It depends what you mean in terms of attitudes. I don't know if many people actually like the settlers. They're in many cases crazy religious people. There's also settlements that were actual villages that were established with the approval and support of the state of Israel, and there's these outposts that people go and build somewhere. Now, again, I think if there's unsettled land, you can go and build there, and I don't think the state can come in and say, well, why are you doing this? Is it because your imaginary friend in the sky told you? Like, that's not a part of the job of the state to determine that. I think attitudes have probably changed in terms of what is most important and most urgent. I don't think many people right now are talking about removing any settlements, because that's at the moment Israel is at war. But on the other hand, the left in Israel has never let reality get in the way of its agenda, which is to say that peace is possible if only Israel made more concessions towards what the Palestinians say they want when they speak English. So one thing that's important to look at is Gaza. Gaza as an example, because there were settlements in Gaza. There were, I think, 7 villages, Jewish villages in the Gaza Strip. They were removed by force. If you look at the videos, I watched this live on TV. This was pretty horrendous. I mean, Israel went in, forcibly removed the people from there. Well, many left. They didn't want to fight the army, but many were removed by force. And we see the result. The settlements were removed. The occupation, so-called occupation, ended. And the situation what came out of Gaza was much worse than anything that had happened before. Now, the same is also true in the West Bank, in the sense that the settlements had been there long before the Oslo Accords, which we spoke about yesterday. But once Palestinians had control of some of the territories there, the situation got worse. There was more terrorism, and the terrorism is often directed at the settlers. Because it's easier to get there. If you're in Judea and Samaria, it's easier to get to a village that's there than it is to get to Tel Aviv. But even Tel Aviv got hit, and other Israeli cities. So I think the proof of the settlements being an obstacle to peace is the proof that is not the case is there.
For sure. I mean, and the Gaza example was a very good one. And the scale of the settlements in the West Bank now, if I'm getting it, I think is at around 700,000 people. It's not, because I think the idea of settlements could call to mind. Sometimes they're described as villages, which I'm sure there are villages, but I think it could suggest to people that it's maybe like 2,000 people or something. But it's quite a substantial population at this point.
Yeah. Now, in some cases, like Ariel, that's a full-on city. I don't know what the exact population is, but I don't know if it's over 100,000, but if not.
Well, actually, I looked it up before this, and it was much smaller than that. It said it was 18,000, but then I can't.
18.
That's what the internet told me just before. But
that's possible. That's possible. I don't visit Ariel often. Okay. I know somebody who went to university there, but yeah, that's but then there's that. So there are those parts that Israel. By the way, Israel's attitude towards so-called settlements differ from the international law or the international community, and what they see as settlements. So, for example, East Jerusalem was annexed by Israel. So the Arabs living there got citizenship, and it is considered by Israel a part of Israel. It is considered by the international community occupied territory and a settlement. Also, the Golan Heights were annexed by Israel, and that is also considered occupied territory. Now, it's not a Palestinian occupied territory, and the West is kind of, I think, quiet on that part nowadays, mostly because who are you going to demand that Israel give it back to? Is it Assad? Is it whoever Assad is fighting against? That's a bit more problematic for the West. But all of these are considered illegally occupied territories and illegal settlements by most countries in the international community.
Yes, and I think it's under the part of international law that gets brought up all the time around this is it's either Part 4 or Article 4 or something 4 of the Geneva Convention, right, which is to do with civilians moving into occupied territories. So people will probably see that brought up all the time. And it's interesting, the fact that the Golan Heights would be, if they were unoccupied, they would be given to Syria. I think it's an interesting reflection of people's attitudes on this, because people do talk about having the pre-1967 borders. And yet, for Syria, people seem to understand that, or opinion in the West is kind of anti-Assad. They view him as this terrible dictator, which I don't disagree with. But then when we get to Fatah and Abbas and Hamas, people's opinions are quite very much in favor of giving control of land to these people, which is bizarre. Why are they against Assad but not against? I mean,
the pre-1967 borders argument is bullshit through and through, because if you want to go back to pre-1967 borders, then the border between Israel and Gaza is the border between Israel and Egypt. That is a part of Egypt. And the border between Israel and the West Bank is the border between Israel and Jordan. And East Jerusalem will be controlled by Jordan. So that's another part of this attempt to pull one over on us and tell us that Israel is occupying something that was supposedly a state, which I wouldn't be surprised if you took a poll of the Saturday marches throughout London. Most people probably think that, and if not most, certainly many. So yeah, that's the 1967 border is nonsense. I want to quickly thank Bonnie for the super chat, and Bonnie asks, what's different between a settlement and a kibbutz? So a settlement, as it's referred to in this context, is an Israeli village or an Israeli town or city in nowadays in Judea and Samaria on the west bank of the Jordan River, and up to 2005, also ones in Gaza were included, and again, the Golan Heights, East Jerusalem, that are considered illegal by most countries in the world, and are considered illegal in English by the Palestinians. Of course, Tel Aviv is also considered illegal by the Palestinians in Arabic. A kibbutz is just a commune, a kind of communist commune that was very popular among Israelis in the early days of Israel. It was a very left-wing country economically. Many socialists were among the founders, and they founded these communes. Now, these communes usually had some sort of factory. They produced something, they would sell it, they would pretend that they are self-sufficient, but they were often funded by the working people in the cities. And at some point, the left, after 30 years after Israel was established, the left lost an election for the first time, and the kibbutz movement struggled a little bit because the money flow kind of stopped. And now they're in some cases they're still around. In other cases they're called a kibbutz, but they're people there have to actually do something productive. Yeah, hope that answers the question. Yeah, Morgan.
Well, something that I was going to say I've noticed since October 7th is that people in the West often seem to just use the word kibbutz to mean village in Israel, which maybe is what it's kind of become, but the history of it is as a kind of collective farming thing.
Yeah, and many of the places that were invaded on October 7th were kibbutzes. So because they were on the border there, there was a great sad irony there of, you see images of shattered windows where like the sticker survives, some left-wing sticker about peace and so on. These were these were, if there was going to be peace in the left-wing vision of it, these were the people who were going to advance it, and they were slaughtered by the partners of peace.
Yeah, it's tragic, isn't it? So my other question, I guess, that I have for you is then, what's the attitude of the Israeli government to settlements? Because looking at it from the outside, it seems kind of mixed. They seem to be kind of, so like you said, kind of involved in some of the settlements to some extent, and then also they seem to be at least in regards to the international community, they seem to be they speak against the settlements sometimes, some of the settlers and their behavior. So what's the attitude of the Israeli government towards the settlements?
It very much depends on who's in power. This government nominally is right wing. We don't see that in how they fight a war, but we see that in the makeup of the coalition. And so they are not, I haven't heard any threat to the settlements from the people in power at the moment. Of course, we've talked on this channel about Itamar Ben-Gvir, the supposedly most right-wing person, fan, at least in the past, of Rabbi Meir Kahane. Like very, very problematic views on this topic. And he is a settler now. He's not, I don't know if he's definitely not the only one currently in government, a current government minister who is a settler. And historically, there have been others. There have been others who said they're settlers who were willing to be removed for believable peace deal. I don't think that's the case with him. but yeah, the current coalition is unlikely to make any steps towards removing settlements. Of course, I don't know if they're likely to make any steps towards bringing them back to Gaza, which I think is something that should be done, or at least that hotel, casino, resort that we've been talking about on this channel.
Yeah, on this channel, I guess we're very enthusiastic about the potential Gazan hospitality industry. Um, so, and something that gets kind of alleged against the Israeli government, particularly by people on the left, is that in effect, violence by the settlers towards Palestinians or something like that, which is a kind of ongoing issue that kind of crops up into the news in the West every few months or so, and is kind of in between the outbreaks of violence from Hamas every few years. That's the basically part of the issue in Israel that people in the West, I guess, hear about. And people on the left basically throw the suggestion that the reason why there's a continuing issue with it is because the Israeli government kind of secretly really wants it to happen, which doesn't seem very likely to me. But so let's go on. What is the issue of the settler violence? Because there's this kind of issue that breaks out every now and again.
So this is another one of those issues where the way it's reported is it's reported in order in a certain way in order to promote a certain agenda and make people hold certain opinions that those reporting want them to hold. I don't know to what extent settler violence initiated by the settlers is real. I would guess there's some. They are religious. Many of them are Messianic Jews who want to fight for the land and do see every individual Palestinian as somebody to be targeted, again, individually, not in the way that we advocate. There's the issue of violence in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria between settlers and Palestinians is Palestinians attacking settlers. Settlers have to fear for their lives at every moment, fear for people. What we saw on October 7th, we've seen in much smaller quantities happen in settlements for many years, and settlers have their own roads, which is a part of what you'll hear is proof of Israel being an apartheid state. But they have their own roads because even on their own roads, they get shot. If a Palestinian terrorist can find a way to get there and shoot Israelis, he will. So this is the issue of violence. Now, we spoke about B'Tselem on this channel, and B'Tselem, one of their claims to fame in the past decade or so is the campaign where they gave cameras to Palestinians to film violence by the settlers against them. Now, we've said on this channel that there's a thing with cameras, which there's a button that you press and then it starts recording. And before that, it doesn't record. And so if they want to manufacture video of violence against them, it's very easy to do. So, again, I would assume there are some cases of genuine initiation of force by settlers against the Palestinians, but this is not what we hear about in Western media when it's reported.
Yeah, and so this is one of the issues which, again, looking at it from the outside, you kind of get a kind of an antenna for detecting when things are being framed in very particular ways, to try and, in a sense, to try and hoodwink you or to make you perceive it in a certain way. And so I saw a report on this by MSNBC from God knows how long ago, and it's of this reporter who's going up to this settlement community with this Palestinian guy, and this guy comes out and shouts at him and tells him to go away, right? And the way the video was cut basically was to make you think like, wow, what a completely like unreasonable situation this was. And now the guy may have been completely unreasonable, except that there was something about the way in which it was kind of dropping people into a huge amount of context, which was probably wherever this part of land was, and not introducing that, and therefore it's really hard to interpret what that interaction was and why it happened. So there's a big issue of that. But then something that I guess Jonathan was saying on Wales too is when he's been on the show recently, which I thought was suggestive about this, is that the issues which have been coming up into the news of settler violence, when there does seem to legitimately be a case by that, at least as far as Jonathan was saying, is that they're arrested and that they're put into jail by the Israeli state. So it's not like, so the suggestion that you sometimes see in Western media is that, oh, the Israeli government secretly wants them to basically, these are kind of the forward pawns of the Israeli strategy to, take over the whole area or something. Whereas I think apparently, at least according to what I was hearing from Jonathan, which no, that isn't actually the right way to think about it. These people are arrested when they actually commit violence.
Yeah, yeah. Israel has the rule of law now. Even if an Israeli, went towards Gaza now and started shooting and something like that, they would that's not the role. That's not something you can do as a citizen, even when you're at war. So yeah, Israel does have the rule of law. If you commit a crime, you will get arrested. If I don't know if Palestinians do the same. Um, to terrorists. I think in some cases they do. I don't think it's motivated from the desire to have the rule of law. But yeah, I was um, uh, kind of laughing at that suggestion that or the report that you mentioned where they went with a Palestinian to a settlement and they were shouted at. I absolutely believe that would be the case genuinely. Any settler who walks into any Palestinian village will get lynched, will get shot or killed in some way, and there is no doubt about that. So yeah, again, there could be violence and shouting, but the real violence is from the Palestinian side against Israelis. Now, we are running out of time. I think we're almost out of time. Thank you, Stephen, for the super chat. Morgan, you are on the reality show tomorrow where we're going to talk about, are there innocent civilians in Gaza? We have some great shows coming up on Friday on the Daily Objective. We have Yaron Brook. Now, I think regular longtime viewers of this channel don't need an introduction to Yaron Brook. I know we have some new viewers in the past week. So if you don't know, if you have joined this channel in the past week, it's most likely because you appreciate something about our commentary on the war. There is no commentator on the Middle East better than Yaron Brook. So I absolutely recommend watching the Daily Objective on Friday. That's going to be me and Yaron Brook talking about how Israel can defeat the Palestinians. And coming up right now after this show is the reality show, the ARCUK Awards. That is an annual tradition that we are keeping today, even though, and again, this is the first time we're doing something that isn't war-related since the war started. So stay tuned for that. Vote. There are categories. We are going to give the nominees, and you, the audience, the live audience, if you're watching live, will vote on that. So thank you, Morgan. I'll see you tomorrow, and I'll hopefully see you all on the reality show in a couple of minutes.
Cheers.